What is up, guys? Delboy here. Following James Degale's decision to vacate his IBF super middleweight title, there have been significant reports online to suggest that Chris Eubank Jr. could be his next opponent. Obviously, he vacated that title to avoid his mandatory challenger, Jose Uzcategui. You know, Jose's a really good fighter, but he just doesn't bring money to the table. Degale at this stage is looking for those big money fights, and Chris Eubank Jr. is one of those fights. I think it would do pretty well at the box office, and from what I see from the reception online from UK boxing fans, I think it's of interest, I do. I feel a potential James Degale versus Chris Eubank Jr. fight is actually a crossroads fight, because essentially Eubank Jr. has had two high profile fights at world level, and he's lost both fights against Billy Joe Saunders and against George Groves. Whereas James Degale, I think, a lot of people rated him in the past, but I think the consensus now is that he's well past his best, he's shot worn, and a lot of people think he's flat out shot. So it's kind of a loser leaves town fight, because if Degale loses, it just confirms people's opinion that he is shot. Eubank lives to fight another day. If Eubank loses, again, that's his third loss in a row at world level, and that really does make it harder for him to come back. So I feel this is kind of a crossroads fight, and I like those type of fights, I've got to say. When there's something on the line, when the stakes are high, even when there's no titles on the line, I like it. And also, I feel the build-up in this fight would be quite entertaining. Both of these guys have had back and forths over the last few years with each other, and, I think that would come out in press conferences, and it would capture the imagination of fight fans in the UK. So I think it would do well. Now, the consensus online is, from what I see, is that Eubank Jr. would be favourite. And I've got to say, although he was comprehensively outboxed by both George Groves and Billy Joe Saunders, I would pick him to beat James Degale. To me, James Degale, I'm in the camp that he is, if not well past his best, shot. He seems to struggle to pull the trigger these days. He's gone back into his old habits of sitting against the ropes, shelling up, throwing very little back, and taking a lot of punishment. When he's on the inside, Degale used to be quite effective with throwing shots, but now his volume on the inside has dropped considerably, and again he gets outworked on the inside. He's shipping a lot more punishment. Even his punches don't seem to have the same snap on them that they once did. James Degale was never a big puncher, but these days there just seems to be nothing on his shots at all. He looks like a shot fighter to me, a guy who is extremely past his best. James Degale, if you actually assess his career from the start, I've been watching James Degale since day one, and I really feel people underestimate the amount of punishment this guy has taken. We'll start with the George Groves fight. That was a big fight at the time. This was back in 2011. It was a fight he lost. He didn't take a crazy amount of punishment, but he took big shots and he lost. But you guys need to check out the fight after that against a guy called Piotr Wilczewski. He was a Polish fighter. And this fight was for the European title, and that was really touch and go. In fact, a lot of people felt James Degale lost this fight. He took a lot of punishment in this fight, and it was a really tough fight for James Degale. After that fight, he had a stretch of fights basically in the wilderness. He was fighting on Channel 5 for a good sort of 4 or 5 fights, and he was fighting kind of subpar opposition in this period of time. But he was fighting injured. I believe he had a groin injury and maybe a knee injury, and it kind of resulted in him kind of laying on the ropes a lot. And although he was beating these guys he was fighting with a bit in hand, he was still taking unnecessary punishment multiple fights in a row. All this adds up. After the Channel 5 days, he signs with Eddie Hearn. Now, when he signed with Eddie Hearn originally, it really looked like his career turned a page. He put out a great performance against Brandon Gonzalez. I believe that fight was an IBF eliminator. He destroyed Gonzalez that night at Wembley Stadium. Really good performance. And the fight after that, he fought Marco Antonio Paraban. Again, put on a dominant display that night. 2 really good performances in a row. He then fought Andre Durrell and won the IBF super middleweight title in America. You know, really good performance in the first half of that fight, but he let Degale get back into it, and he took quite a few shots in that fight. The fight after, he fought Lucien Butte in Canada. Again, really tough fight in Canada. Took some big shots, took a lot of unnecessary punishment. A really tough night for James Degale. The fight after Lucien Butte, he fought Porky Medina. Again, a lot of people felt he lost this fight. He took a hell of a lot of punishment in this fight, and you know, a lot of people said he was very lucky to get the decision. After Medina, he fought Badou Jack. Now, I felt he flat out lost this fight against Badou Jack. Took a beating, took several heavy shots, was dropped hard in the last round, and was very lucky to get a draw that night. After the Badou Jack fight, he took a beating against Caleb Truax. You know, he was hurt a couple of times in that fight. And after the Caleb Truax fight, he rematched Caleb Truax and won a very dull decision win. A very scrappy decision win. So my point is, over the last few years, you know, basically since that George Groves loss, James Degale hasn't had it easy. He's been involved in several tough fights. His body has picked up a lot of injuries. You know, James Degale is nowhere near his prime anymore. To me, he's well past his best. And Chris Eubank Jr., although he does a lot wrong, although he has a lot of technical deficiencies, I think he has enough to beat James Degale. Chris Eubank Jr.'s volume far exceeds that of James Degale. James Degale has far too many moments in fights where he either sits in the pocket flat-footed, or he sits on the ropes and kind of shells up. In these situations, Eubank Jr. is just going to outwork him by sheer volume. And I don't really feel that James Degale has the punch power to really keep Chris Eubank Jr. off of him for the 12 rounds. I really don't. You know, one thing about Chris Eubank Jr. we can say, we can kind of criticise his technical ability, but he does have a good chin. He took several flush shots from George Groves and didn't get stopped. You know, Chris Eubank Jr. has a good chin, and I don't feel that James Degale can keep Eubank Jr. off of him. Firstly, he doesn't have a punch power, but he doesn't have the volume. And when was the last time you ever saw James Degale outbox anybody? There's this perception about James Degale that he's a slick boxer. He's not. He's never been a slick boxer. He gets hit quite a bit. You know, he's awkward. He switch hits. He's got a weird punch technique. He throws shots that are at weird angles. He's awkward. He's ungainly. He's not a slick fighter. You know, he's not a traditional boxer. I don't think he will outbox Chris Eubank Jr. I think he's going to get outworked in the pocket. He's going to get worked over on the inside. And don't be surprised to see Chris Eubank Jr. stop James Degale. I know James Degale himself has a very good chin. I know he's as tough as old boots. But, you know, I'm telling you, that chin is deteriorating. He is deteriorating. His body is picking up more and more injuries. He's there for the taking as far as I'm concerned. If this fight happened, I would strongly favour Chris Eubank Jr. to win it. What do you guys think? Peace.